with us on this amendment. Now, on the issue of Eduardo Saverin. Last week, Senator Casey and I introduced the Expatriate Bill. It is a bill that makes sure that people that renounce their citizenship for tax purposes don't escape what they owe and can't come back without repaying all they avoided paying this great country. It's a modest proposal made in response to the regrettable effort by a person named Eduardo Saverin, who renounced his American citizenship to avoid paying even the historically low level of 15% on capital gains for the several billions in windfall profit he is set to receive from the Facebook IPO. Now, Mr. Saverin is no longer involved in the day-to-day running of the company, and it bears mentioning that the current active leadership of Facebook is comprised of responsible corporate citizens who meet all their responsibilities and obligations and proudly maintain their American citizenship. Mr. Saverin, on the other hand, has chosen to disown the United States to save some money on his taxes. Senator Casey and I have proposed a response. Our bill would bar Saverin and others like him from re-entering the country. It would also reimpose taxes on investment income earned in the United States, even if an expatriate is living abroad. Now, I believe the vast majority of Americans of all parties and persuasions think that renouncing citizenship in America to avoid taxes is troubling, unwarranted, ungrateful. It is upsetting, to say the least, that when a person who has benefited so thoroughly from being an American, a person who accessed and enjoyed so many exceptional aspects of American society, just takes the money and runs, rather than doing the right thing and repaying a debt to a nation that nurtured, facilitated, and cheered his success. And I think the vast majority of Americans are receptive to suggestions for how we can address this kind of unacceptable behavior. Look, nobody enjoys paying taxes, but Americans know that we wouldn't have a functioning society without them. We argue and debate about how the proper rates should be, what is fair, what level will sustain and grow our economy and our middle class. But I think that most Americans, Mr. President, agree that paying a mere 15% in capital gains taxes on a sum of $3 or $4 billion is not too much to ask a person, especially a person who fled their own homeland because their native society could not provide a reasonable level of security to their family. While the real point here is not just about this one case, our bill addresses a small group of evaders over the last decade or so, it is worth pointing out that in this particular case, the Saverin family found security here, thanks to taxpayer-funded cops, and stability, thanks to a taxpayer-funded military, and a world-class university system like that at Harvard, again underpinned by public support. And they also found an expansive middle class that would become the market for his product, and a dynamic entrepreneurial free market economy that allows for significant accumulation of wealth, and functioning capital markets that were recently saved from the brink of catastrophic collapse through who? The American taxpayer. And they found a government that invests in research and development and things like creating the internet and the web and GPS and microprocessors, all of which were necessary precursors to what Saverin and his cohorts created via Facebook. And let's not forget, a non-corrupt legal system which decided a case in his favor that made him a billionaire. Yes, Eduardo Saverin did very well by being an American. And I think that most Americans know full well what he accomplished was not done in a vacuum, that his success is the outgrowth of his participation in an extraordinary American society, a society we collectively support. No one gets rich in America on their own, and when people do well in America, they should do well by America. I believe the vast majority of Americans believe this too. So when I introduced our legislation, I was sure it would garner wide and deep support, and in general it has. That is why it is so baffling that the extreme right-wing Republicans, people like Grover Norquist, the de facto leader of the Republican Party on tax matters, would rush to the defense of a man who is turning his back on America by dodging taxes. Amazingly, the extreme right-wing echo chamber has made Saverin into a cause célèbre, defending his decision to disown the country as somehow heroic Their words, not mine. I was amazed, just amazed, day after day, the right-wing blogs pouring forth praise of Savrin, a man who renounced his citizenship after doing so well by America. I took it that as a given that citizenship and all that it implies in terms of loyalty and duty to America was axiomatic. But unfortunately and sadly, Mr. President, that is no longer the case. Here is just some of what was said. Forbes said that, quote, for defriending the U.S., Facebook's Eduardo Savrin is an American hero. Can you believe it? An American hero? Renouncing your citizenship now qualifies as heroic for the hard right wing? George Washington was heroic. Rosa Parks was heroic. John McCain and Gabby Giffords are heroic. Navy SEALs are heroic. I would tell Forbes magazine and the right wing, Eduardo Savrin is not heroic. National Review's Mario Loyola says it is the foolish and counterproductive tax policies of the left that are chasing Eduardo Savrin to another country. I'm sorry, what tax did he move to escape? A 15% rate on capital gains on several $billion. Is that so onerous that it's chasing him away? I'm sure any American worker would love to have the 15% rate. And if 15% is too high, what does Mr. Loyola or Mr. Norquist think the proper capital gains rate should be? Do they think we should have even a lower rate on capital gains, which disproportionately goes to the highest income earners? What is the proper rate, Mr. Norquist, if Mr. Savrin's a hero for escaping the 15%? Should we make it 10%? Should we make it 5%? Should we make it 0? Well, they won't say, because if they did, they'd be laughed out of town. The Wall Street Journal says we are oppressive and demagogic. No, in America you're free to leave. But if you leave to purposely avoid paying your fair share, then we will attach a consequence to that dodge. Right-wing blog after right-wing blog, from the American Thinker to the Daily Caller, echoes that punishing Savrin for tax dodging is un-American. Really? Silly me. I thought renouncing one's citizenship was un-American. While on the right-wing radio they ask if it's a more favorable tax haven than you can find elsewhere, why is it automatic you're unpatriotic? Why is it automatic that you're a coward? Because, my fellow Americans, when you renounce your nation to fatten your bank account, you are, by definition, being greedy and unpatriotic. Grover Norquist says our bill is like fascist Nazi Germany, or apartheid South Africa, or communist Soviet Union. While in American Thinker we are being accused of erecting a Berlin Wall. In the Examiner they say we are totalitarian. These comparisons are absurd on their face and border on the odious. The law Mr. Norquist references in Nazi Germany was purely discriminatory. It targeted a particular race of people, the Jewish people, and punished them for nothing other than being Jewish and exercised freedom of movement. It was meant to constrain that freedom by forcing Jews to reside inside Germany. Our proposal targets no single race, creed, or class. It doesn't punish you for factors beyond your control, like who your parents were. It applies based on actions you take, namely disowning the United States to avoid taxes. Our law is not triggered by a wish to travel beyond America's borders or even reside permanently in a foreign country. It's the act of renouncing one's U.S. citizenship for the purpose of avoiding taxes that triggers our bill. Another right-wing opinion piece asks, if you leave to protest heavy taxation, why must you pay a penalty? I'm sorry, gentlemen. Mr. Savrin is not protesting anything. If he was protesting, he'd stay here and fight for a lower rate, not simply exempt himself and leave others like him to continue paying a rate he considers too high. What he's doing is free-riding on America, dodging paying his fair share, and pocketing the billions from an IPO. Yet another right-wing blog says we're engaged in, quote, class warfare to vilify people that create wealth, just like the Nazis did with the Jews. Well, Mr. President, I know a thing or two about what Nazis did. Some of my relatives were killed by them. and saying that a person who made their fortune specifically because of the positive elements in American society in turn has a responsibility to do right by America is not even on the same planet as comparing to what the Nazis did to the Jews. The comparison is odious, but it's in a bunch of these right-wing blogs. It goes on and on. The whole torrent of vitriol is absurd, just absurd. Mr. Savran is, in essence, an economic tax dodger. And once upon a time, the right wing castigated draft dodgers for failing to heed their nation's call. Those who fled the country were vilified as cowards, as self-absorbed traitors. Yet in this case, the same exact kind of unpatriotic, un-American behavior is actually being defended by the right wing. It's off the deep end. And when a view this irrational has overtaken one end of the political spectrum, it has serious, negative consequences for our ability to solve our nation's problems. If those on the other side of the negotiating table are this obsessive on taxes that they consider their minimization a higher priority than preserving our national identity, then it's no wonder a grand bargain on taxes and spending has been so out of reach. In the last several years, the far right has disregarded one historically conservative priority after another in favor of an all-consuming obsession with protecting low taxes for the wealthiest Americans. First, it was the deficit. The Republicans have for years claimed that deficit reduction was their top priority, but that has since been exposed as a myth. Every independent economist will tell you that the deficit problem cannot be solved except through both spending cuts and revenue increases. It is, in fact, preserving tax cuts for the very wealthy is counterproductive to reducing annual deficits. Yet the far right marches on in defense of tax cuts for millionaires, deficit be damned. Last August, our nation's creditworthiness became a second casualty of the far right's insistence on low taxes for the wealthy. The right wing was so dug in against any reasonable fiscal compromise, they forced a manufactured crisis over raising the nation's debt ceiling. This caused the first ever downgrade of our nation's credit rating. Unbelievably, the far right prioritized millionaire tax breaks over the nation's full faith in credit. Despite that unreasonableness, we thought we had finally figured out a way to force the far right to come to grips with the need to deal with revenues. We came up with a mechanism called the sequester that would trigger harsh defense cuts if the other side continued to refuse any new revenues. Surely, if there's one thing conservatives prized as much as tax cuts, it was defense spending, right? Wrong. As we speak, the far right remains unwilling to cede an inch on revenues, no matter what it means for the Pentagon. The deficit, the nation's creditworthiness, our national security, all of these things have taken a back seat to the far right's idolatry on taxes. And now this has gone so far, this idolatry they have taken to such an extreme end, they make Eduardo Savran into their patron saint. In the name of low taxes for the wealthy, they have lionized an inherently unpatriotic person. The hero worship of Savran is Norquist's extreme right-wing anti-tax agenda being carried to its logical but irrational conclusion. And it is scary. It's a scary, absurd place where even a tax dodger who renounces America for his own 30 pieces of silver is celebrated as a patriot and an American hero. It is perverse. Reasonable Republicans rightly seem wary to embrace taking things this far. House Speaker John Boehner labeled Savran's move absolutely outrageous, said he would support legislation to stop wealthy expats relocating to avoid taxes. Others have been quiet, perhaps cowed by fears of being the next target of the right-wing echo chamber. But shouldn't loyalty to America and the broader responsibilities and duties of citizenship trump base, non-essential financial interest? Sadly, the answer of some on the extreme right is no. The Wall Street Journal attacked the thrust of our proposed legislation as an example of the age of envy. Well, it's not envy. I, in fact, am happy that those who invented and perfected and invested in Facebook got rich. Having an idea, succeeding, and maybe getting rich off this great idea is the American way. More power to them. However, what is not the American way is taking a free ride on all the exceptional aspects of American society. What is not the American way is deriving massive advantage from various publicly supported elements of that society and then skipping town when you hit the jackpot. Yes, you're free to leave. You have a right to be selfish, even greedy, and renounce this nation. I understand this will make you more money, and that there is a rational, if simplistic, economic argument to be made in favor of doing it if the only factor that mattered was always getting richer and all other values were irrelevant. But we Americans have other values, too. America is special for many reasons. It's secure. It offers freedom of expression. It's diverse and tolerant. It's entrepreneurial. It's economically and culturally dynamic. Looking out for the common good is in our blood. It's a part of our shared history and the vision of our founding fathers. We provide for the common defense. We promote the general welfare, and we are not just out for ourselves. No, we look to secure the blessings of liberty, not just for ourselves, but for our posterity. And it is this, and so much more, that makes America an exceptional society. Mr. President, I am really appalled by the reaction. Not appalled by a debate on tax policy. I'm appalled by making heroic a man who renounces citizenship to escape a tax rate, capital gains, of 15%. And too often, I think that every action and dilemma we face is now reduced to a question of whether this means bigger government or smaller government. And since those on the extreme right believe we must have smaller government at all costs, they vehemently oppose all taxes. But sometimes, as with this case and others like it, it is not just about the size of government. It's about doing what's fair and right and just based on your responsibilities of a citizen. Citizenship is not simply business decision. It is not just a transaction. Those on the right, like Grover Norquist, defending this economic draft dodger, are saying something very different. They are saying that the social contract somehow excludes the accumulation of money. We know that we give up certain rights and freedoms to live in a place like America, but we can't just carry out vigilantism to pursue justice. So, in conclusion, Mr. President, being an American is not a one-way street. There are enormous benefits to being a citizen of our nation and a member of the amazing society it has spawned. But there are also responsibilities and duties, like patriotism, service, contributing your fair share, commitment to community and family. As we approach critical debates on the matters of taxation and fairness and job creation, so critical to keeping America the greatest nation on the face of the earth, I certainly hope that it is these values, not glorified self-interest, that drowns out all other values that guide our actions. Thank you, and I yield the floor.
President.